Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial Group, Rydan Investments, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights 7 to 9 Eastern on Jethro FM.
Happy to check in with this next guest here. He may be our most frequent guest, as I said before the break, one of our favorites here on the show, Robert Bondy from Spartans Wire. It's a good time to check in on the Spartans because I think we usually seem to be on the same page here, Robert. And I was reading some of your stuff as I normally do, but in anticipation of talking with you. And I think we're both similarly upbeat about this football squad this year.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's great being back on the show, Ryan. Always enjoy talking ball. And, I'm kind of, I don't know if I do this every year because, everyone's got their own biases, but it seems like I am a little bit more upbeat and kind of expecting some bigger things out of them this year. Certainly, I think there's a high ceiling. There's also maybe a low floor, but I am starting to feel a little bit optimistic about what they can achieve and kind of what they bring back and have added in the portal and, what they could probably do this year.
Well, and for those folks that would say, well, you write for Spartans Wire, of course you're going to be upbeat. I will remind those folks that when you were on early in the season, last season, you were the one that was calling the Indiana stuff that was happening. You were the one that said on the show that you thought they have a chance to go 8-0, which they did, and then that they may go to the college football playoff long before you were hearing that anywhere in the national media. So that was not because you had some stock in Indiana. Maybe you were trying to pump me up since I'm an Indiana guy, but I was a little bit more reserved about that take, and you were a little bit more out there. But now the shoes are kind of on the different feet, and I'm still an Indiana guy. I'm still an Indiana grad, but I think there's reason to be hopeful, and you had a recent article about how the Spartans have a chance to be the Indiana of this year. And looking at their schedule and looking at how things break, if Childs makes that leap that I think he can and becomes more accurate because he's got all the other tools, I think it's mainly the accuracy that he's got to have. He's got some more weapons there. There's been some switching around. I think they reinforced the offensive line, which was a key. But they, like you said, they've added a lot of pieces, and they added certainly more than they lost, in my opinion. And they've got a more favorable schedule. Part of that schedule was pretty brutal last year.
Yeah, well, I think last year, the schedule, it's in the Big Ten, right? I don't think there's truly an easy schedule, right? I mean, I know some people pointed to Indiana last year, maybe having an easier schedule and that leading to their success, but a lot of what Michigan State has this year and Indiana last year, and me kind of connecting the dots between the two, is a lot of toss-up games, right? And it's kind of those things of, last year for Michigan State, they went into this season, with Oregon and Ohio State and Michigan and, teams that, which granted they played Michigan pretty tight, but those were games at the beginning of the year, you kind of chalk those up as L's, right? And then it got even more difficult when you saw what Indiana did. They became a top 10 team. Illinois was great last year too. So there was, going into the year, you kind of knew it was going to be an uphill battle. This year, while the schedule isn't as daunting at the top, you really only have maybe that Penn State game as that kind of clear-cut, probably mark it as an L in Penn and feel pretty confident about. But other than that, it's a lot of toss-up games. Now, granted, going to USC, going to Indiana, going to Nebraska, those aren't easy games, right? But they are potential toss-ups because, again, it could be, that Michigan State's a little better. Those teams aren't maybe as good as the preseason expectations, and you win a couple of those. And if you can find a way to win those toss-up games, you quickly kind of find your spot in the same spot as Indiana last year. And for Spartan fans, they'll remember really 2021, when Michigan State had Kenneth Walker III. That was kind of the same idea, right, where you had a lot of toss-up games. You won most of those toss-up games. You upset Michigan. You had some other decent wins early in the year, and you would find yourself in the playoff that year if it was the expanded playoff. So I think, it's hard to say, Michigan State will be the Indiana this year, or Michigan State will be in the college football playoff, but I don't consider it maybe as far-fetched as, other people would say. Now, again, maybe I'm wearing the Spartan goggles when I say that, but you look at the schedule, and a lot of those games are going to be in that kind of, maybe a 7-point favorite or 7-point underdog range. And when you're in that area, you get a little injury luck, you get a little bounce, you see that growth from, Aiden Childs, and all of a sudden you could see yourself looking at a pretty special season.
Well, yeah, and you basically lay out the blueprint in that article, and that's what kind of broke it down for me, because this is a quote from Robert's article, and Spartans Wire, be sure to check it out. But basically, you're saying, okay, you win the non-conference games, which should be somewhat doable. Western Michigan, no offense to any alums that are in the studio right now or that host the other show on this radio station here, but at Boston College and Youngstown State, those all seem like they could be pretty winnable games depending on how things go. You got them losing to Penn State, which is going to be the odds-on thing for that game. And Penn State had to reload a little bit this year, so I'm still interested to see. I could see them taking a little bit of a step back. I'm not saying upset alert or anything for that game, but we'll have to see if they have as solid of a season next year as they did this past year. But then you're just winning 7 of the last 8 games, which, like you said, there's no easy games there. But USC, Nebraska, UCLA, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, and Maryland. I don't think it's totally out of question to be able to have that run if some of these things come to fruition here that we're talking about, that these guys take some leaps and all of that, because they had a pretty decent roster last year, but it was clearly something to build on. They had some young guys. Those guys have gotten a full season under their belts, and now, most importantly, arguably, Jonathan Smith has had a full season in the program. Now they've got a new athletic director that should add some juice. So I feel like between all of those things, all of those factors, that might help get things kickstarted here.
Yeah, no, I mean, you unveiled and rolled it out perfectly, and again, that's glass half full, very optimistic way to look at it, but it's possible. And I think even looking at this last year, I know it's when they went 5-7, it was their third straight year missing out on a bowl game, and really there was that tough finish to the year. You flip a couple games, that Boston College game, I recently watched it, and you watch the game, and they really should have won that one. You win that game, you go to a bowl game, you feel a lot better about where the program's at after year one. The Michigan game too, that was a very close one that Spartans will probably say they should have won, and it felt like they probably could have won that game, and that would have again made a huge difference. So if you're 7-5 instead of 5-7 right now after the first year of Jonathan Smith, you feel a little bit more optimistic about what this team could be achieving. You feel more, you could probably get a little bit more national buzz, and maybe, it's not as far-fetched to throw out the idea of going to the college football playoff. So, that alone last year shows how quickly you could swing one way or the other. So again, for me, really, I think we're going to know a lot about this team by week 2, because if they don't handle business against Boston College, who was a good team, right? It's not a bad team. It's not an easy game. But if they don't get that win week 2 against Boston College, we could be looking at, closer to the floor situation of, another year without a bowl game. If they win that game, you build some momentum, you go out west potentially for that first tough road game at USC, 3-0, and you see where we go from there. So they have all the, again, if everything breaks their way, they could be really good. If it breaks the other way, they could be finding themselves again sitting at home in the postseason. And if they don't get to a bowl game this year, you start to, wonder what we're doing, because it's that have been 4 straight years. I think I remember this past year, Michigan State is the only team that hasn't gone to a bowl game from the Big Ten the last 3 years. So it's kind of a shocking stat to think about, but it's kind of where they're at right now. They got to get over the hump this year and get to a bowl game at least.
Well, and I think that's a pretty plausible floor for them. I think you brought up the key game. I watched that Boston College game. I watched most of the Michigan State games last year, and that really was a key game. That was probably one of their worst games, kind of against expectation, because they were so close. There was a few things that could have broken their way, but there were some mistakes that weren't very timely, and yeah, you do that game differently. That game has a different result. It might play out for the rest of the season. So to your point, with Boston College being early again, if they can get some momentum, then all of a sudden, because that happened with Indiana when everybody was downplaying them and saying, oh well, they played easy teams to start the season. Yeah, sure, they weren't very highly ranked teams, but their margin of victory was better than Alabama's at that point, who was playing a similar schedule. So that seemed to be a good sign. It's not so much the competition, but you got to factor all that in. And then by the end of the season, people went, oh, okay, I guess this team's are for real. Although some people still didn't adopt that and then said they shouldn't have been in the playoff. But then we saw how that worked out with the aforementioned Alabama squad. But
Right, exactly.
but yeah, I think there's a real chance that they can get some momentum in that non-conference schedule and then roll into the regular season, so to speak, the conference schedule. Whereas last year that was there was a bunch of games all bunched up there that it was like, man, they're going to be fortunate to win 3 out of 5, 3 out of 6. That's not the same schedule in my opinion. Just looking at the schedule, you never know how this is gonna go. But that for this year, it looks a little different.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think this year, there is a stretch there in the middle, I believe, where they play, I want to say, UCLA at home, then at Indiana, and then I think Michigan. And then after that, they have a road trip to Minnesota and Penn State. And that, middle 5 is going to be tough. But again, those aren't, it's not like necessarily last year where they played, I believe, after the Boston College game, they played Ohio State at home. Yeah, it's at home, but it's Ohio State, and then at Oregon the following week. So the 3-0 start quickly became 3-3 just because, that Boston College loss is so critical, right? And they were able to rebound. I think they, after that, beat Iowa to get back above 500 and made that Michigan game interesting. But it's less of a true gauntlet of, you can mark down some L's at the start of the year. It's going to be a lot of 50-50 toss-up games. And obviously that's speaking now here in July. We'll see, by September how the team's looking. And those 50-50 games may not look 50-50 either way, right, depending on how the teams are playing out, injuries, and a lot of considerations. But if you look at the positive side, I think they could be pretty darn good. If you look at the negative side of things, they also could, come up short on those toss-up games, and you find yourself sitting at home in the bowl season again.
Yeah, and I want to talk, we're going to take a quick break here, but I want to talk about the potential players to watch out for. We've hit on some of the names, but maybe some of the transfers and some of the additions, or some of the guys that you expect to take a leap in order to execute this level of improvement. But stick with us. We'll come back with Robert Bondy. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern on 94.9 FM in Grand Rapids, Michigan, 98.9 FM in Plainwell, Michigan, 99.5 FM in Lowell, Michigan, 105.1 FM in Kalamazoo, Michigan, 980 AM in Otsego, Michigan, and worldwide on Jethro.fm. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh, executive producer, Deb Kay, producer, Rex. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.